John is always 5 minutes in the future or 5 minutes in the past. I say it all the time. He is always relevant. And in so many instances, the plotline of a Bond film finds its way into occurring in real life right after. Thunderball is no different. In Thunderball, 2 nuclear bombs are stolen at sea and ransomed against foreign countries. Thunderball found its way to the big screen in 1965 and quickly became the most profitable Bond film until 2012's Skyfall was released. Audiences were captivated, and the grandeur and the scale of the movie were unmatched. The Cold War was at its height, and the fear of nuclear warheads was a part of American life. The world was on edge, and everyone was afraid nuclear warheads would land in the wrong hands. Nearly a year later, in 1966, everyone's worst nightmare came true. A mid-air collision between a B-52 bomber and a fueling plane happened over Palomeres, Spain. And also, the B-52 happened to be carrying a nuclear warhead that was 100 times more powerful than those dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Minute detail. What came after was a series of cover-ups, governmental neglect, media lying, and a very, very, very tense effort into trying to locate nuclear warheads that were on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to the end of World War II. World War II started in a very different way than World War I. World War I was fought through trench warfare, slow-moving. It was a slow-moving assault on your opponent, and it was heavily reliant on humans to do the majority of the fighting. And World War II changed. Germany changed all that because they had amassed tanks, planes, jeeps, cars, and an enormous amount of fast-moving vehicles that enabled them to run over their opposition, called Blitzkrieg. This was still a ground-based warfare to start. Germany took over country by country on their march to London. As the war continued, more and more airfare was being utilized. The air raid sirens would deafen citizens as aerial assaults came. The bombs would rain down upon cities, turning them quickly to rubble. As the war progressed, the bombs were getting better, the planes more efficient, and it was becoming clear that the air was going to decide the war. The B-29s of the time were becoming instrumental for the United States in the Pacific side of the war. Tons of ordnance were being dropped on Japan, and it was only a matter of time before Japan would be forced to surrender. Their industry and their cities were being decimated. Japan had underestimated the United States' ability to wage war across 2 oceans. The schematics, infrastructure, and the planning it took to bring an army, supplies, and planes to Japan was something the Japanese did not think the Americans capable of accomplishing. This proved to be a severe underestimation, and by 1945 the Americans were well on their way to victory. But Japan would refuse to surrender. Japan vowed to fight until the very end. The rest of the Axis powers had surrendered already, and the United States and the rest of the Allied forces wanted the war over with. The world was fatigued from fighting, and the end had to come. President Truman gave the orders to send Fat Man and Little Boy, the code names for the atomic bombs, to be dropped on Japan. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped Little Boy over Hiroshima. The bomb destroyed 5 square miles of the city, killing 80,000 people instantly, and countless more from radiation exposure. The Japanese still refused to surrender, so 3 days later, Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki, killing an estimated 40,000 instantly. Japanese Emperor Hirohito surrendered to the United States on August 15, 1945, thus ending World War II officially. Out of the evil of war, a new threat to humanity had been birthed. The invention of the nuclear bombs now changed the world. No longer did it take tons of ordnance delivered by many planes, but rather one bomb that could end an entire city. With this, the world changed, and the fight for the air was now crucial. This was exacerbated by the growing tensions of the Cold War. After the Potsdam Conference, the world was divided up by the victor powers. Germany was split apart, and it would be a glaring example of the USSR versus the West. The USSR and the United States were at war in all aspects: industry, space, and now nuclear bombs, with the United States and the USSR being in a standoff of opposing paradigms. The two needed to keep the other at bay. By 1966, the Cold War was at its height, and nuclear war seemed one step away. In several instances, one shot, one wrong move could have ran the world into World War III. One way that the United States stayed at the ready against the Soviet Union was to have planes that could fly from the United States all the way to the Soviet Union to drop bombs and then safely return back home. They accomplished this by creating mid-air refueling for their bombers. Prior to this, the only way the United States would have been able to attack the USSR would be to hold bombs and bases on foreign bases. Keeping nuclear warheads in a foreign land was too dangerous, and the logistics of transporting nuclear warheads was too dangerous as well. This changed when Boeing came up with the flying boom. The way the boom works is that a 33-foot, 8-inch long aluminum tube that is 2 feet in diameter is connected from one plane to the other. The plane with the fuel stays at a constant speed, and the altitude as the receiving plane inches towards it. The boom is extended out, and the boom operator waits until it is above the roof of the receiving plane before a lizard tongue type thing is extended and activated to secure the boom to the receiving plane. From there, fuel is sent from one plane to the other. This all takes exact precision and timing. As one plane is losing fuel, another is gaining fuel. The altitude and flight can become drastically different. In this time, it is a slow balancing act that takes place, and one wrong move can mean the end for both planes. In a worst-case scenario, this exact thing occurred in 1966 over Palomeres, Spain. In January 16, 1966, a B-52 Stratofortress took off from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina on its way to Europe and to circle back. It was part of Operation Chrome Dome, an operation to have 24-hour coverage and rapid response capabilities in case of sudden war. The crew had done this trip before, and it was a long and boring trip for the most part. The crew consisted of a pilot, a co-pilot, boom operator, and a man that could actually arm the nuclear bombs. The 4 bombs on board were not armed at the time. There's a process of arming a nuclear weapon where another smaller explosion or catalyst has to be set off in order to create the chain reaction needed to create the bigger mushroom cloud explosions. The bombers chose the area above Palomeres, Spain to refuel because the weather is consistent and rarely deals with rain or storms. It also has no cities in the area. And in what should have been a routine mid-air fueling turned into disaster. The exact cause is still unknown, whether it was a collision or something else, but the fuel caught on fire and an explosion occurred. The members of the fueling plane were quickly incinerated in the intense flames. 3 members of the B-52, including the pilot, were able to eject from the plane and be saved by fishing boats as they fought off hypothermia. The B-52, with its 4 nuclear warheads, continued its fiery descent towards Palomeres. The huge bomber crashed into a tomato field, spraying fire and debris all throughout the countryside. The smoke engulfed the sky as the fire raged on, as the remaining bits of the plane burned. Almost immediately at a nearby base, every soldier available was rounded up in order to look for the 4 lost bombs. 1 bomb was found intact near the site. 2 of the bombs had exploded, and while it wasn't a nuclear explosion because, again, the bombs weren't armed, so the catalyst wasn't set off in order to make all the chain reaction in order to happen a nuclear reaction. However, it still had lots of radioactive material and lots of plutonium, and when the bomb exploded, all of that radioactive stuff was strewn all across the countryside, making the countryside radioactive itself. The 4th bomb remained missing. The Air Force spoke to a fisherman who recounted seeing a parachute with a dead man with his guts hanging out as it landed into the water. What that actually turned out to be was the 4th bomb that had had its parachute deployed. Engineers narrowed the search for the bomb to a 27-mile radius and brought in Alvin, a 22-foot long, 8-foot wide submersive that could dive 6,000 feet below water to search for the bomb. Alvin could hold a pilot and 2 observers. It had several cameras and a grappling arm. On March 24th, the 4th bomb was located by Alvin and the crew. A cable was attached to the parachute, but as the bomb was being lifted to the surface, the rope broke, causing the ball to fall back to the sea floor. After searching again for another week to locate the bomb, it was found, this time using an unmanned craft to try to bring it up. That craft became tangled in the parachute cord, and it couldn't bring it up. This time, the craft, the bomb, and the parachute were all brought up at once, and after a labor-intensive effort, the bomb was brought to the surface, ending the ordeal, the 81-day ordeal. Whilst the search was going on, the cover-up was in full swing. Palomeres was a heavily tourist area in Spain near the coastline, and at the time, Spain was ran by General Francisco Franco. Franco was adamant that the words nuclear never be mentioned. Franco feared tourism in the area would cease at the mere mention of anything nuclear going on. The US was all too happy to agree to this, as they themselves wanted to keep it quiet. as quiet as possible that they had lost nuclear warheads. When speaking to the media, the B-52 was referred to as a long-distance jet, and the bombs as elements of a secret military nature. The soldiers that were sent into highly radioactive areas with no protective equipment were told that nothing was to worry about, that they'd be fine. Many of those soldiers today have underlying health issues, cancer, different forms of cancer. It remains a hot button issue today as America has promised to clean up Spain multiple times. Hillary Clinton promised that it would be fixed, and it still isn't fixed when she was Secretary of State. There's been a lot of things that have gone on since then. But this story would have just been lost in the lores of history if it wasn't for our guest today's uncle. He actually broke the story. Again, Francisco Franco, who, if you don't know about him, he's a very interesting man. Definitely gonna do an episode on him one time. But he was all too willing to be like, no. You don't want to talk about nuclear warheads. We don't want to talk about nuclear warheads. So it was just kind of forgotten about. It was an explosion. It is what it is. Move on with life. That is until this man's uncle found out the real story, broke it. It's a fascinating story. It's a great interview. So welcome in my guest, Alex Lamas. All right, I want to welcome in my good friend, Alex Lamas. He's coming in. I met him, actually. I stalked Zaritsky's comments, and I found that you were into Kung Fu. And then I found, because I was just doing a Kung Fu episode, I'm like, what? And I saw your Instagram, and I saw you were taught Kung Fu. I'm like, yes, finally, because I was searching so hard for somebody who like taught Kung Fu and stuff. So I reached out, and I hit him in the DMs, not gonna lie, slid in them DMs. And then we got to talking, and now he gave me a topic for this, and it's such an interesting topic, and I can't thank you enough. It was so much fun to research, and such an interesting guy. And just go ahead and introduce yourself, Alex.
All right. Well, first of all, let me just say I am so excited to be on your show. I've listened to quite a few of the podcasts, and I will say you are my favorite. And you're
I appreciate that. First is that you've listened to a couple and still agreed to come on here. I'm very flattered. I'm very excited.
No, I mean, this is like you're like the Joe Rogan of the Bond community. So this is amazing.
Just the tattoos. That's all it is.
Yeah. So no, really. I mean, because of the subject matter, because you have very intelligent conversations, because also I was an anthropology major in college, so I'm also very much into history. When I was in college, one of the things I used to love to do is I used to love also the Indiana Jones films, and I actually wrote a paper on the Thuggee cult in India because of the Indiana Jones movies. So it's kind of like you're doing what I used to do and used to love to do anyway. So this is like your podcast goes right to my heart. So I am so excited to be here, and I'm really honored that you asked me. And I have to also just say that yes, you reached out on me, and me being so lame with Instagram, I did not see the instant message until like 4 months later, like a few weeks ago, like a month ago.
You're not the first DM I've had that I didn't get a response back from. So
no, that was my fault because I do not know how to use Instagram. I'm just starting to learn how to use it, and I missed it, and it was my fault. And I instantly replied to you apologizing because I don't want you to think, oh, who's this schmuck? He just totally blew me off. And that's how we started going back and forth. And I had no intention of actually, trying to glom onto your show. I just thought that this subject matter that we're going to talk about would be a great subject for your show because it's right to the heart of the matter. It's a James Bond plot. It happened for real, kinda, and it was involving a member of my family.
Yeah, when I heard your story and the story of your family, and when you reached out, I was like, I gotta have him on. He was so good. And then the minute I got to talking to you, I could tell like I just gotta ask a question, and you just are natural at this. So I'm really excited.
We'll see.
So go ahead and talk about again. So introduce you. So you said you started as an anthropology manager, and just kind of go through a little bit more about Alex, and then we'll get into the topic itself.
All right, really short. Actually, I started out as a filmmaker, and I've been in the film business for about 25 years as a storyboard artist and assistant art director in the film union. The anthropology thing was literally like a weird detour that I took because my mom was doing archaeology. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I want to study that. But I soon learned that there was no hope of a career in that. So as soon as I graduated, right back into movies. And that's where I had been for the 25 years. However, just try to make this story a little shorter. If you had ever been on a film set, it's like 6, especially indie films, which was the majority of my career. It's 16-hour days, 6 days a week, 6 months at a shot. And if you have 2 or 3 back to back, you're just going like a steam train. I've had like 3 times in my life where I worked 72 hours straight, no stopping, which is just ridiculous. And it took a toll on my health. And it really took a toll on my health and well-being. At the same time, I had been studying Kung Fu. I always wanted to study Kung Fu. I had taken karate, taekwondo, judo, fencing. I was in on the college fencing team, on the saber team. So I was always into the more like action sport kind of thing like that, and fighting sports. And as I was getting deeper into the Kung Fu, I realized that it was keeping my health up. And eventually, after a certain time, I realized I can't do the movies. I can't do it at that same level because I was getting older. I was getting into my 40s. And I started getting jobs teaching Kung Fu and Tai Chi. And I'm like, well, I'm actually kind of making money over here. So let me put the movies aside. And I started teaching Kung Fu and Tai Chi full time. And that's pretty much what I do now. All right, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
No, but it's just fascinating. It really is fascinating. So it's funny how so many people have a lot of the Bond community is so enriched with people who just have amazing stories, and I think it's just I just think it's the coolest community to be a part of. And it's for things like you've been in the film industry for 20 years, then you switched to Kung Fu. You're well rounded. You were on the fencing team in college. Like I've never actually seen anybody who actually fences. And here you are on the fencing team. So I just always love meeting, even if it's not pertaining to the thing itself, it's always interesting just meeting people and hearing their story and all that the Bond community has to offer. I mean, you've been to GoldenEye. You have sat in El Padron's desk.
I am not worthy. I am not worthy. Yeah, no, that was pretty mind blowing. Sitting in Ian Fleming's chair, sitting at his desk, looking out the window that he looked, swimming in the area where he swam, snorkeling where he snorkeled. It was just, that was just insane. That was I mean, and what's so funny is when I was swimming, I had read Live and Let Die, and what was the other one that takes place in Jamaica? Oh my God, Dr. No. But in Live and Let Die, he describes a lot of the undersea area of Jamaica, and I'm like, I read this. I'm in it, and I read it, and it's like, surreal. Oh my God, it was mind blowing. So
huge envy. Huge envy over here.
Anybody can do it. It's not that expensive. If you get a little bungalow, and the people are just lovely. The people at GoldenEye are lovely. The Jamaicans were just so warm-hearted and beautiful. And it literally is just pick up the phone and make the reservations. It's not that hard. So
I'll definitely have to try it next. So let's get into why we're here today. So when you initially told me about this story, and you're like, hey, if you ever want to check this out, check out this real life Thunderball story. And I just loved researching it. I love this topic. It was such an interesting thing to read about. And I'm starting to delve into, not for this episode, but another episode. I think I'm going to do one on Francisco Franco. He's an interesting guy too. So I think may have to bring you back on for this one. But tell me how you found this topic, how it pertains to your family, and how you got it, why you sent it to me.
Okay, so I have this it's not me, it's my family, especially on my mother's side. This crazy family that has done these amazing things. And one of them, my grandfather's brother. My grandfather's name is George Stathos. His brother was named Harry Stathos. At the time, he was the UPI head in Madrid, United Press International. He was a very successful journalist for his whole life. He had been all over the world. He was stationed in places like Germany, Italy, and Spain. He ended later in his career, when I really knew him, he was a staff writer for the New York Times, no, for the Daily News. I'm sorry, for the Daily News. I remember as a kid going into the Daily News, and I'm like, this is the Superman building. This is the Daily Planet. Oh my God, I'm in the Daily Planet. I didn't even know it at the time, but yeah. And and he was also a jazz writer. He knew all the famous jazz musicians around the world. He brought Miles Davis to our house one time.
What?
Yeah,
What?
and I actually kind of remember it. I mean, I have a vague memory of it, but I remember this guy. I'm like, wow, this guy's kind of scary looking, because it was in the 70s.
Yeah.
And so he brought Miles Davis to our house. He was very good friends with people like Miles Davis. He was very good friends, Ben Vereen, Blossom Dearie, you name it. Just all the big jazz people in New York. He was a great jazz pianist himself. And kind of a minor celebrity in New York, in that New York culture at the time in the 60s,
New York
70s.
in the 70s. The New York in the 70s jazz club seems very swanky. Like it was like all the cool came, where all the cool kids were.
I was 9, so I don't know, but I can imagine.
Yeah, I'm sure.
My
they didn't
parents
let you in the back.
No, but he did get my parents into Studio 54. Yeah. When it was at its, height. Yeah. But anyway, so this guy is, kind of a larger than life character. So was his brother, my grandfather. And one of the sort of great tall tales of the family dinners and Thanksgiving dinners was him telling how he broke this story about nuclear bombs being lost in Palomeres, Spain. And he was the guy who broke the story that it was nuclear weapons. So the story was it was part of a thing called Operation Chrome Dome. What I didn't realize, and I've been doing a little research on myself, that at the time in the 1950s, the United States, did not have a very large missile program. Mm-hmm. Our nuclear weapons defense system was almost primarily with bombers. So we really didn't have a lot of missiles or any, while the Russians were way ahead of us in rocketry. They stole their Germans and got their Germans to make all these rockets. And so they were already making ICBMs when we were still flying around in propeller airplanes.
Yeah, and so when I did my episode on the space race, that was one of the things that I came across, was that the Soviets, they didn't even know the Soviets had the missiles until they all of a sudden were in space. And they're like, holy crap. It wasn't just that they were in space, they were the fact that they have the propulsion technology far than what we had. And that's really what sped up everything. With space race was more just missile race, but let's do this too.
Yeah, and how far. No, that's cool. Yeah, and how far behind we were in so many ways, and especially in espionage. During lockdown, I sort of got into this hobby of learning about the Cold War as well, watching a lot of Cold War TV shows and movies and documentaries and whatnot. And, they had a spy network going back till the Bolshevik Revolution. Yep, and we were just getting ours going. Now, speaking of early spies, his brother, my grandfather, George Stathos, was in the OSS during World War II. So he was a spy, my grandfather. And he was a spy in Portugal. And what he would do was he was a pilot, he was a Navy pilot, and he would fly a Grumman Goose down into Portugal and then go into Estoril in the casino. Could have met Ian Fleming hanging out there, 2 spies. Right. And I mean, his tales of his spying days during World War II weren't that spectacular. What he was doing was making fake business deals with German industrialists and trying to figure out what they were doing. After the war, he went back to Germany, found some of these guys he made the fake deals with who weren't arrested as Nazis and made real deals with them. and he was one of the first people to import Volkswagen Beetles into the United States.
That's great, because
That was,
Volkswagen at the time was fascist, and that's how so many of them got in
yeah.
there.
Well, we're going into the 1950s now. So in the
Yeah.
1950s, later he, you know, after the OSS, he used those contacts to like, well, maybe I can make some money, and maybe the ones that weren't Nazi, you know.
It's funny how at post-World War, it was those people who had privilege during the war that really capitalized. One, they're just obviously driven people, but they also were able to use their contacts. And after the World War II, how the world fell, that's a lot about how the wealth got distributed too. So it's so fascinating. I love that time, from the Potsdam Conference on to.
It's so interesting, and just researching this thing and how everything was falling into these two camps that were so solid on both sides. And even in Spain, so I talked to my parents about what was going on in Spain at the time, because my father came from Cuba, so he was born in Havana, Cuba, and he left in '62, you know, escaping Castro's regime, to come here. And that's another whole story I can get into. There's another road we can go down to for another hour.
Every word you say, I want to ask you 55 follow-up questions on. We'll keep you on your path here.
Yeah. No, that's another whole story about. And then his uncle was Castro's pilot, and he got caught, and there's a whole other CIA thing. And so, yeah, there's another interesting story there. But so when he came here, he, as a young man, he wanted to be a singer, and he's a very good singer. And my grandmother, my mother's mother, was a dancer, and she was a very famous dancer. She was like a chorus girl in some like Marx Brothers movies. She was did a lot of little sort of background chorus girl things in movies, but she was on Broadway. She was in nightclubs. She had, you know, met my grandfather. And here's another story. She was, now we don't, she was born in Pancho Villa's army.
Really?
Yeah. And we would have to do DNA test if she was the illegitimate daughter of Pancho Villa, but Pancho Villa's actual daughter would come to our house, and she would constantly call my grandmother little sister.
Oh my God. What a tangled web your family weaves.
And she was also a model for Diego Rivera in one of his paintings in Mexico City. But that's another story.
You're gonna end up with 7 podcasts there.
I know, it's I told you, this family history I have, it's nothing to do with me, but it's just, I'm just related to these larger than life characters.
So amazing.
And so what happened is that my grandfather divorced my grandmother, remarried another woman. The woman was so wonderful that everybody loved the new wife more than they liked him. And so he moved to Spain, but to Barcelona. And my parents, so my dad, the way my dad met my mother is that my dad and my grandmother were in the same nightclub performing together in New York City. And she goes, "Oh, you got to come home and meet my daughter. She's beautiful. You would love her." And he did. And they, you know, eventually they ended up getting married. And so what they decided to do was to kind of honeymoon in Barcelona. And what he realized was that he started making a lot of business contacts. So the honeymoon turned into we're staying, we're living here. So it's not just a honeymoon, we're staying. And they were living with my grandfather in his apartment, where I eventually was born. And I actually revisited a couple of years ago, which was really weird. But it's still there. The apartment's still there. The building's still there. It's really interesting to go to the place where you're born.
Yeah.
So they're living in Spain in 1965, and then they were all of a sudden they get a phone call from my uncle saying, "I got to come over. I can't tell you what it is right now, but something really huge just happened." And they're like, "Wow, what's going on? What's going on?" And so they had to wait like a day or two because he was in Madrid at the time. So my uncle had these two Spanish, and there were these two reporters that kind of were like his kind of flunkies slash proteges that he was kind of training, and they were following him around. And my mom remembers these guys. They were two very good looking guys, and they were Spanish, but they also grew up in the United States in California, and they found my uncle, and they were learning from him, the craft of journalism. So he said he didn't want to kind of go down to Palomeres because there was the idea that there may have been nuclear bombs aboard, but nobody knew. Nobody was saying anything.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly, when this happened, my parents living in Barcelona had no idea anything happened, because he said that Franco's regime did a huge blackout of all newspapers. Like they didn't want any reporting on this whatsoever. So they had no idea that anything happened.
It was great for both parties. I mean, the U.S. didn't want it out. Franco didn't want to stop tourism in the area.
Right.
So
right.
It was.
Yeah, and I was asking my father, how was Barcelona in the 1960s, and he said, well, on a day-to-day basis, it was a lot of fun. It was like it is now. It's a beautiful city. It was a lot of fun, he says, but I would ride the bus a lot, and I would see not police, but these like secret police would come on the bus, drag somebody off, and beat them in the middle of the street. And you didn't know why, but all of a sudden, these secret police would come on, drag somebody off, and he said he's seen this happen 3 or 4 times while he was in Barcelona, where Franco's goons, so to speak, and because he came from essentially he knew what fascism was.
Yeah,
he
knew what he was seeing,
Yeah, he came from when he was living in Cuba, he would say that neighbors of his would just disappear, never to be heard from again. Under Batista.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that Franco isn't more known. He's kind of obscure. Like when you hear the lores of history, Franco isn't up there with one of the worst dictators, even though he killed 200,000 people. The biggest mass graves in the entire world are in Spain.
I didn't even know that. Yeah. Really?
The biggest mass graves in the world are in Spain.
Really?
From Francisco's regime. So
wow.
he would just, it's like 200,000 deaths at least are attributed to him. And he just pile them in, and they're just these giant mass graves that nobody even knew about. And they're the biggest ones in the world.
Where in Spain? Do you remember?
I'd have to double check. I just started getting into the research for Franco, but it's amazing. And then I hear now there's even where he's buried, there's a mausoleum. And Spain, I didn't realize how prevalent fascism in that was in Spain, but apparently there's a whole actual pretty prominent fascist party in Spain. And they celebrate, and one side wants to take down the mausoleum and all the remembrance of Franco, and this other one had cheers for him and cheers fascism and all this other stuff, even though he was he killed 200,000 Spaniards in the Spanish Civil War. It's just amazing to me. I this stuff, and I don't even know. I never would have thought before doing this research. I would never thought Spain was like that. So it's interesting for you to say that your dad actually saw people getting dragged off a bus.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and it terrified him. He was like, "Do I really want to live here? I don't know." But he said also on the day to day, you wouldn't. It was normal,
I mean,
it's just
the girls are pretty.
All of a sudden, yeah,
pretty girls will make you look the other way on some things, huh?
Yeah, yeah. And it's like mostly it's normal, and then all of a sudden, oh, what happened? Oh, where'd that guy go?
Raul?
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting, because there was a lot of tourism going on in Spain at that time. Spain was really ramping up its tourist industry. Even in that area in Palomeres had resorts. And you had this weird thing going on, because one of the things that I saw at that time in the 1950s and 60s was the only people who really recognized Franco's regime were other dictators from South America and Central America and the United States, that he really wanted to because you remember at that time, Europe came out of a fascist nightmare. Yep. So Franco was Hitler's buddy for a little while.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, my dad says, yeah, but by doing that, he kept Hitler out of Spain. And he says, in some ways, he was a genius, because the things by by kowtowing to Hitler and doing some of the things that he wanted, he also, while Hitler was moving across Europe, like this horrible storm, it ignored Spain.
Yeah.
So Spain never really, except for the Spanish Revolution, Spain never got caught up in World War II in and of itself. And so now, only 20 years later, everybody who was in World War II still very, very cognizant of fascism, and here's this tiny little remnant of those days, and they kind of tolerated and ignored him. So where did he get attention from? Well, he got attention from other fascist dictators in Central and South America, and the United States. And the United States, he got attention from because they could use Spain as a base to fly their missions and fly over Spain. So that's why he was able to sort of make nice with the U.S. So there was this whole political thing going on, but yet he attracted everybody from all over the world to go to places like Barcelona and Madrid because it was just a fabulous place to be.
Yeah.
In other ways. So tourism was huge. And I guess people sort of rationalize, well, we're helping the Spanish people too. So yeah. I don't know.
When your uncle gets to the site, did he talk about what he saw when he actually gets to the site, or how close did he actually get to the crash site?
Oh, later he did get to the site. So going back to the story, so he has these two flunky reporters that he has do his bidding, so to speak, and he sends them down first. And they try to get onto the American base. Of course, they're turned away. And as they're driving away, they're flagged down by an American soldier who asks him to, at first he asked them, do you speak English? And they said, yes, and because we speak English, and they spoke perfect English because they lived in California for a while. And he says, well, I need help translating. Now, of course, they didn't let on that they were reporters at all. They didn't let on that they were journalists. They were just they thought there was a lot of local people helping with, to try to help, with cleanup and this and that and logistics and stuff. So a lot of local people did help. So maybe he thought they were locals because they spoke Spanish like natives. They were, but they spoke English perfectly. So he's like, oh, great. Can you help me with these farmers? I have to make them leave their farm because they don't understand there's radiation here. And they were like, radiation. Oh, okay.
See, what is radiation? Get your notepad.
Yeah. So they go over there. They talk to the farmers. They tell them that it's unsafe there. They have to leave because there's radiation. And as they were leaving, they say, "Oh, and so did they recover all? Did they recover all the bombs?" And the military guy says, "Oh, you know about the bombs?" And they're like, "Yeah, we just came back from the base." Oh yeah, and he just blabbed everything, just blah. Yes, and the two bombs exploded, and scattered plutonium all over the place, and one bomb is missing, and the other bomb we recovered, and this whole thing was a big mess. And they were like, "Oh wow," and they were like, "Harry, have we got a story for you?" And of course, it hit the papers the next day, and this huge, big, what would you call it? Like international nightmare,
I mean, I can't imagine
publicity. Nightmare came on.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine waking up the next day and saying, "Hey, 4 nuclear bombs went off and one's missing."
Yeah,
and just not understanding. I mean, just before being able to watch it on YouTube or anything. You're
just 1 year after Thunderball.
Exactly, 1 year. Yeah, everyone just saw Thunderball. One's under the water, and you're thinking, "Oh, great." There's
actually
a guy
less than
Where's the guy with the eye patch?
Yeah, less than a year, because Thunderball was still playing in a lot of theaters when this happened.
It's so crazy about the James Bond franchise. 5 minutes in the future, 5 minutes in the past. It just all the time. And I think what's happening with No Time to Die, I think No Time to Die revolves around a virus. So they did it again.
Yeah,
they did it again.
It may be a virus, and they were like, "Oh shit, did we take that, or we leave that in and do another Thunderball thing.
So after the story gets published, now I'm sure a whole lot of people in high places now want to talk to your uncle. What was that like?
Angie Biddleduke, the ambassador from the United States to Spain, calls the house where my mom and dad are staying, because he doesn't have Harry just moved to Madrid at this point, so he didn't really have a permanent address. The only permanent address they could find was his brother, George Stathos, who lived in Barcelona, and my parents were staying at that apartment at the time. Literally at the time, I think, my mom had just found out she was pregnant with me, and she gets a phone call, and it's the ambassador Biddleduke screaming at my mother, "Where is Harry? Where's that son of a bitch? Blah blah blah." And she's like screaming these obscenities. They're like, "Oh my God, I don't know what." She's like, almost on the verge of tears, because here's the American ambassador, chewing out my mom, looking for her uncle. Where is that son of a bitch, Harry Stathos? He just, made a nightmare for us, publicity, public relations disaster. And, they're threatening to kick us. They're threatening to kick us out. They're threatening to kick the ambassadors out. I could lose my job. They're, threatening to kick all, American citizens out. You have no idea what a huge disaster this is. And she said he called her for like 3, 4, 5 times, screaming at him, until he finally got him on the phone. And so my father was, because at the time, still nothing in the press. I mean, prior to Harry Stathos breaking the story and it exploding all over the world, the only people who really knew about the Palomeres disaster were the people who were involved in it and my parents. And that was it. And they were like, "Do we tell our friends that there's a hydrogen bomb off the coast of Spain ready to explode? Should we leave?" And my mom was like, let's stay here. Let's not go. My uncle tends to exaggerate. It's probably nothing. They probably already got all the bombs and he's just making this up, and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, my dad's like, "I don't know. I kind of think this is our cue to go." And she's like, no, it'll be fine. And and then there was so then eventually, they do find the bomb. And what was so funny, my mom was saying, "Well, where are the Russians?" And all of a sudden, Russian trawlers show up. And
really?
these Russian trawlers were spy ships. They were disguised to look like merchant ships or fishing vessels. But I don't know if you remember in For Your Eyes Only, at the beginning, there's like this fishing vessel, but inside is all this high-tech, British Navy. Well, those things are real. And the Russians had them. And the Russians were swarming the area, and they actually had submarines also looking for the bomb.
I'm sure everybody was trying to get that thing.
Yeah. So then my uncle reports that, Russian trawlers just showed up, and so he reports about the Russian trawlers, and then he reports about the submarines that were all looking for it. So of course, the Russians were all over that place. There were as many Russian submarines as there were American, and it was literally a hunt to find it. And how long did it take? It took like 30 or 80 days, I think, before they actually found it.
I think it was 281. I'd have to. Maybe it was more. Maybe it was only 80. I thought it was 281.
Yeah, I think it was only like 80 days.
It
was like 80 days, I believe.
Now I'm curious now because I forgot. 81.
So anyway,
81 day ordeal.
Yeah, it was an 81-day ordeal. So the story goes that they find the bomb, but they don't want to really. Again, they're trying to keep this contained. They're trying to keep all the news people. By that time, after 80 days, the news cycles, they just go their way, and people start forgetting about it. And it's not in the news as much anymore. And Harry strikes up a conversation with a on his way back from he was traveling back and forth through Germany for other stories and jobs and whatnot. And on his way back from Germany to Spain, he sits down next to an American Airlines pilot, and the pilot had just been out the previous night with a colonel who had told him that we found the bombs and we recovered the bomb, and then told it to this pilot, who told it to my Uncle Harry, who didn't know did not know was a news reporter. And so he publishes bombs found, and so again they call up Harry like, what are you doing?
Where did you get this information from?
Yeah,
Damn
one
it,
of the
Miles.
funny one of the things that I just saw a documentary on this. Weird. Literally, there's a Spanish documentary, on an hour-and-a-half documentary, is from 2007, but it literally got posted to YouTube 10 days ago.
Really?
Yeah.
No idea.
Isn't that weird? So, in that video there was a publicity stunt that Biddleduke did, where he went swimming in Palomeres to show that the waters were not contaminated, that they were fine. And the reporters ask him, "Oh, do you feel okay? How do you feel coming back out of radiated waters?" And he's like, "Oh, if that's radiation, then I love it." And blah blah blah. It's, typical politician garbage coming out of their mouth. And but what they didn't show was that my Uncle Harry was there, and as retribution, Biddleduke and some State Department guys grabbed him and threw him in the water. Like, this is what you did to us. And so they dragged him, fully clothed with a suit and tie, and with his recorder and everything, and just dragged him and threw him into the ocean. That was another part of the story that my uncle told. It's like, and they grabbed me and they threw me down, and because they were so angry at me.
That's funny. So the ordeal's over. The 81-day ordeal's over.
Yeah.
Bombs got it. We're all good. Everything's present and accounted for. Was there anything after the story, or was there anything kind of retribution, or was it good for your uncle's career? What happened?
It was
any kind of backlash, or was it kind of smooth sailing out once the ordeal was over with?
Oh no, it was great for his career. I mean, it skyrocketed him to be one of the top, journalists at the time, because he was part of this huge story that he broke. And that's, eventually he, when he came back to the United States, the Daily News hired him immediately, and blah blah blah. And so it was. One of the other funny things is that when this whole thing was going on, my grandfather kept saying, don't talk about this story on my phone. And my dad was like, why? My phones are tapped. By whom? The CIA. Why are your phones tapped by the CIA? It had to do with, and we're going to do another podcast, how my grandfather was sort of responsible for the formation of the Israeli Navy.
We're definitely gonna have to get into that. I definitely have to get a good Israel, the Mossad. I need that good Mossad episode.
Yeah, I have to do more research on this, and I have to really find the because there is no, for obvious reasons, there's really no documentation. But what happened was, just really quick, he was in the OSS during World War II. After World War II, he got his captain's license, and he became a ship owner. And he was like one of the Greek ship owners. He knew Onassis, he knew Niarchos, and he was importing Volkswagen Beetles at the time with his ships. The new CIA came to him and said, "We need you. Can you basically we got a hold of this." Now, the way he told is that it was a Navy frigate, a Canadian Navy frigate that was in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and they're like, "You have to sort of take it out of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. We bought it, so it's ours, but we can't officially do anything with it. So can you steal it and take it to Israel?" The only problem is there's going to be a blockade at Gibraltar because the British don't want you to do this, and they're going to try and sink you. And he was like, yeah, sounds like fun. And
You got it, partner.
And again, I'm not going to get into it, but there's this huge hold. We literally, my grandfather had me up all night long telling me this whole adventure of crossing the sea, breaking the British blockade, running guns and naval warships into Israel, into the Haifa port. And so because he did that, and my dad was saying, like, I don't think he ended it with just that one. I think he was my grandfather. He said, well, I wasn't part of the CIA. He called himself, I was a vendor. I don't know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's how he classified it. He was, no, I was what was called a vendor. So he wasn't. So the CIA, when they have dirty work, they don't do it themselves. They hire others to do the dirty work for them. And my grandfather was one of those people.
I feel like the Russians and the Soviets have been doing that forever. I think the most recent thing we're seeing now is with this hacking. I think it's Russian vendors that are doing this hacking. Pipelines.
No doubt. Absolutely no doubt. Absolutely no doubt. So, and they're in places like Belarus and probably Ukraine and God knows where else. And
oh my God,
but because of that incident, for most of his life, the CIA had his phone tapped.
That's crazy that they used him and they still didn't trust him. That's crazy, right? Like.
No, well, let's put it this way. Here's another crazy story. So fast forward to 1980, he gets another phone call from the CIA. Oh, I remember you did this job for us back in 47, and we need you to, if you can, at least supervise. If you can take the ship, that would be great. If you can, at least give us an idea of how to do this. We want to run guns to Iran. He's like, what? He goes, what do you mean you want to run guns to? He goes, well, we need to get weapons into Iran. He's like, why are you getting? And this was long before Iran-Contra broke. So I remember this. I remember sitting in the living room with my mom. My mom's talking to my grandfather in Greece because he lived in Greece. He retired in Greece. And he's like, you are not going to Iran. She's literally on the phone yelling at him. You are an old man. You have no business going to. And why the hell are we bringing? I thought they were our enemy. Why the hell are we bringing weapons into Iran? What the hell is going on? He's like, I don't know, but for whatever reason they want me. So I'm at least going to chart some, make some charts and chart some routes for them.
Sounds like a Liam Neeson movie.
It's like, but she's like, you're two, and her half sister, like, you can't do this. You're not allowed to go to Iran. Why are we running guns to them anyway? And I knew about this literally long before anything broke. And I'm like, yeah, that's weird. Why are we sending? Yeah. And this was during the hostage crisis. So we were selling basically weapons for hostages at that time. And nobody knew about it except my grandfather and his daughter. Me and we kind of forgot about it, and then when the Iran-Contra broke, we were like, "Oh, that's what it's all about." No. I thought that was weird. So yeah, that's my crazy family.
Fascinating stuff. Yeah, we're definitely going to be doing more of these episodes for sure.
Yeah, and it's amazing because even at the time when I was doing the research, I read that. That Palomeres incident, that's not the only bomb that's missing. Mm-hmm. There's like 6 to 8 bombs out there still unaccounted for. 6 to 8 nuclear devices. Like several one off the coast of California. There's like 2 off the coast of North Carolina. There's one buried in a swamp in North Carolina that they can't get at, that's just sitting there.
Yeah. That Air Force base in North Carolina was like the main hub for all that stuff.
Yeah, and in 2017, the Russians lost one in the Arctic Circle. It's still there. Right now, as we speak, Russian and American subs are just going nuts trying to look for it, racing to see who can find it first.
So I grew up in upstate New York, by Montreal, like right by the Canadian border. Still American, but I'm like this close to being Canadian. But I don't tell anybody that. Let's keep that.
Speak French though.
Yeah. So it was a big Air Force base up there, and they closed in 1991, 92. And I was doing a carpet shampoo business when I was going through college, just trying to pay my way through college. I went through this one spot, and it looked like a normal house on the outside. And then I went in. It was ended up going 13 floors down into the basement, and it used to have 2 missiles right there. It was like the backyard of where I grew up. So they could actually, there was an airport, and there was always a runway there. And I was like, that's weird because I grew up in a real poor area. Nobody had an airplane. So like, why would there be an airport there? But we're like, whatever. And then there was they would house 2 nuclear missiles in there, but you wouldn't be able to tell. So the guys who owned it brought me down, and he went down. There was a presidential podium and everything there, and like a whole radio, like we would see in 19, like if JFK were to address the nation in like a fallout shelter, it would be there, and there were two armed missiles there at all times. So just the
Well,
craziest stuff.
the missiles weren't still there though.
The missiles weren't there. No, they
So
had
it's like
closed when the base
silo.
closed. Yeah, well, it's underground. You couldn't tell, but look, the place where the underground bunker was, 13 floors down, and then to get into the presidential thing, there was like a big bank vault thing that you had to turn just like you would, and the heavy steel door would come in, and then the
This is
presidential.
like right out of a Bond movie. Seriously.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was surreal. Like, and then the presidential podium was right there, and then I didn't get to see the missile silo, but it said right 2 over were the missile launch points. So it was great. It's crazy the things that are in secrecy that are hidden still in this world.
Did you ever like sneak in there yourself and back in there, or just?
No, I never did. They were selling it, and then you had to get through a special. I don't even know why they had me as a carpet shampoo guy. Like I was just trying to sell vacuum cleaners for Electrolux at the time. Like, why am I shampooing this carpet? But they were all about showing it to me. So it was so cool. Like, and that's
come on. Wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I have
looks
a
like a
nuclear
wood cabin,
fallout
but...
shelter and a secret, nuclear missile silo here for sale.
Downstairs, I'm thinking it's downstairs. So it was so cool, so surreal. So these stories like this are always so fascinating.
That's awesome.
But I can't thank you enough for coming on. We're definitely going to be doing more of these, Alex. This was so great.
Listen, this is awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry I missed the first Kung Fu one because your guy, Stanley
Tatum, yep.
Statham, did such a phenomenal job. I was like, I'm a film guy, but his depth and breadth of knowledge of films, especially in action films, was just mind-blowing. I'm like, there is no way I could have given you a good show the way he gave you a good show at that time.
Yeah, Stanley's
no
great.
way.
Stanley's a good dude, and he's great at this stuff. It
was good that I missed it. But we can do new ones.
I definitely am glad that I got you for this one, and we're definitely gonna do more of these. But again, I have to do with this with every interview. All right, every time. All right, so
I was waiting for this one.
You got a choice.
This is the dessert.
This is the dessert. All right. So you have to drive. You have to sit in the back with 2 nuclear warheads. All right. You have to drive or do the same thing that the B-52s were driving. You never know. You could explode. But the caveat, is you get to sit on one nuclear warhead. A Bond girl gets to sit on the other nuclear warhead. Who's taking the nuclear warhead journey?
Michelle Yeoh. All right, listen. I was a Michelle Yeoh fan long before she ever showed up in a Bond film.
Yeah.
Being a kung fu guy, loving kung fu my whole life, loving learning kung fu. I've seen countless kung fu films. I have my wife watching kung fu movies. She was like, okay, I'll tolerate it. And she's Chinese, so she was like, okay, another kung fu film. But when I saw her, when I first saw her in Wing Chun, I was like, wow. And then I saw her in Super Cop, and I was like, really, wow. And then she shows up in a Bond film, and I'm just
sold.
Totally. I mean, listen, they're all there because they're beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
They're all there because they have the beauty. That's But for me, what when I think about it, like, what are the Bond girls that I like? And there was from Russia with Love,
Tatiana Romanov,
Daniela Bianchi, and Jane Seymour, and the whole cast from Thunderball, the whole female cast from Thunderball, all of them.
Yeah. Thunderball is the best. I think the best female cast. I think Thunderball wins.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Claudine Auger.
Hands down. When you put them like all together, hands down. That's like it's probably my second or third favorite Thunderball. Is my second or third favorite Bond film. You know, and it's like, what is the quality of that I found attractive in all these women? And it is a certain elegance.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at it, and I was like, it's something that they have this elegance about them, the way they're poised, the way they carry themselves, the way they walk across the room. When you see now, Michelle Yeoh was a ballet dancer. She was in the Royal Ballet.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons why she could do martial arts so well was that because of her ballet training. And it's interesting, when I was in sort of student teaching at the Kung Fu school that I went to, it was called Kwan's Kung Fu. My teacher, his name is Sifu Shiyu Kwan. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago, but just want to give a little memory to him. A couple of ballet dancers came into the school and they were like, we want to take lessons. And I'm like, okay. And I didn't really think much of it. And so I started showing them the form. They got it right the first time. And I was fucking pissed. And I'm like, it took me 3 months to get down what you just got down.
Yeah.
How about, she's like, you don't understand. If we don't get the choreography right the first time, we don't eat.
Okay, that's
so we have to get it. Yeah. Now the difference was power. When a ballet dancer kicks, they lift their leg, right? Mm. When I kick, boom.
Yeah.
It's a blow meant to penetrate. When they do it, it's like this gracious lift. So they look beautiful, but there's no power. Now the difference is that you can train that power within a few months. And then they're going to be spectacular. So, that's why Michelle Yeoh could do what she could do. Mm-hmm. And Zhang Ziyi and, a lot of, who else was a dancer? Van Damme was a dancer.
Yep.
So all these dancers going, and a lot of the guys in the old Shaw Brother movies, about literally half of them were martial artists. The other half were dancers. Yeah. And so they had this poise, this grace, this way of moving, this way of carrying themselves. So it's that kind of elegance. Let me ask you, if you're on the bomb, who's next to you?
Oh, Xenia Onatop. If I'm gonna die anyways, I'm gonna go out.
Ooh.
That's it. Huh? What can I do? That's it. We're both gonna go down together. Either the bomb gets me or her thighs get me. Either way, I'm happy.
You're dark.
You have no idea.
No, seriously, like, what's the qualities that you find attractive?
I think like films like Femme Fatale, like a Fiona Volpe. I find that she's intelligent, very crass, sexy. Even when she's like talk, like all you do is talk. You should be locked in a cage, all that stuff. But still carries herself with a good aura, classy. When you can bring her out, but that she's also got a little bit of a dark side to it.
Yeah, you like that edge.
I do. That's awesome. But yeah, something like that. I like the Fiona Volpe. If I were to do like a just plain, I like if I were to do like a nicer girl, I guess a Vesper. But my top two.
Everybody loves Vesper.
Yeah, my top two would be Fiona Volpe, Xenia, something like that. Something a little
dark.
Yeah, something a little dark. Yeah. But Alex, This has been so great. This has been such a good time. I can't thank you enough.
And, I loved it, man.
Yep, absolutely. And did you want to plug any of your Kung Fu studio or anything like that, or any kind of Tai Chi or anything you want to plug?
Not really. We're kind of coming out of COVID. I'm still kind of in flux. And I mean, I'm working. I'm doing mostly Tai Chi stuff outdoors with senior centers and whatnot. And then we're just trying to work to see what's going to happen with the Kung Fu. Because of course, the COVID obliterated my Kung Fu class. And so we're trying to see when that place where I was teaching opens again. I was literally teaching in a Buddhist temple. So we're seeing if they open, if we can get the class back together. I had a lot of really good students that I'm kind of left by the wayside. I feel bad about, but in the meantime, I'm still doing the Tai Chi, and that's doing fine. So it's no problem.
Well, Alex, it's been a blast. Again, Alex Lamas, thank you for coming on, and we are definitely going to do this again, my friend.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Alex. That was so much fun. Again, I love this part of history. I love the part of history after World War II as the pieces were being put back together, because the world had been torn apart. The world was ripped apart by World War I and by World War II. And after World War I and World War II, the victors put together this world. And everything that we have today is put together after these conferences and these subterfuge, putting dictators in place that they want to putting nuclear and bombs, and all this race. It is all decided by just a few minute people in this world, and a few minute groups. The CIA, KGB, all these other things, MI6. They all decided how the world is today. And it was post World War II, after the world was in complete chaos and in rubble. It all fell apart. And that little window between the 1945 to 1970, 1975, that I just find the most interesting time of history, just because the pieces were being put in place, and the world didn't know how it was going to go. And one move one way or one move the other way, who knows? We could be speaking Russian today. And thank you again, Alex, for coming on, taking your time out. Really great article, really good interview, a really good time. I can't wait to do this more often. And as always, stay positive out there. This has been Donnie Waldron, Quantum of History. And what should they be doing?
Like what you saw, then hit that subscribe button. Comment down below and leave a like, and hit that subscribe button. Why are you not hitting that subscribe button? Hit